Hello. So, this was originally supposed to be a video talking about the recent rogue buffs dropped on the PTR, which I'll briefly summarize. It's a bunch of changes that make the specs more damaging, which is good, but none of these buffs really change anything rotationally, right? Alright, pause. I was finishing working on this video, and then Blizzard said, we're dropping some more buffs. So rather than separate them into two videos, we're going to talk about them. Assassination Rogue. We're getting buffs to a lot of abilities, and then a nerf on Crimson Tempest. So the TLDR is that this is a single target buff, and then our AoE kind of just is net neutral. We lose damage through Crimson Tempest, but we get some of that damage back with the Envenom buff, and right, our Envenom is a big chunk of our caustic damage. So for Mythic Plus, I think this is a net positive, right? We're addressing the weakness of Assassination Rogue, which is their pure single target. It's real bad, bringing that up. They're also bringing the damage of some of our bleeds up, right? Rupture and Garrote. At the moment, the meta spec in the Undermine for Assassination is to play like the no Garrote build. You just remove all the Garrote talents. So Garrote might be back on the table. We'll have to wait and see. And then for Raid, I think Assassination Rogue was already in like a decent spot. It felt pretty mid on a lot of fights, but on some fights it felt very strong. So bringing the numbers up like they have probably means it's a better option for more bosses. It is a little interesting they increase Envenom damage again. Our damage profile is super heavily skewed towards Envenom at the moment, and now we're bringing that number up even more. So anyways, numbers are up. Assassination is feeling pretty good. However, the hero talent tree is not getting addressed. Specifically, the Fatebound tree kind of blows. The whole 90-second profile we were really hyped about. Not seeing any changes here, right? No notes addressing the Kingsbane aura buff not lasting the duration of your Kingsbane with your tier set. No notes regarding the Cold Blood timing issues that Fatebound has. So kind of an L if you're hoping to play Fatebound, but overall these seem like good changes for Assassination. Outlaw, on the other hand, we have all damage increased by 10%. This definitely seems like a single target focus, again, much like Assassination. Outlaw's single target damage on the PTR was kind of stinky, so much like Assassination with the Crimson Tempest nerf, they're reducing Blade Flurry damage by 5% to accommodate this dial being tuned up. I think that makes sense for Outlaw. It's not a very invasive change, but I worry they might need more. We'll have to wait and see. Then, and I think the best changes we've gotten so far, Sub Rogue, Black Powder damage up, Nimble Flurry damage up. Sub's issue right now is that it's great in Raid, but the moment you have AoE or you put it in a Mythic Plus environment, it just falls off a cliff. And part of this video is talking about that, and I think I still will talk about it, but these specific changes address that, and it's a very good change. So Sub Rogue stocks definitely up. But anyways, back to the video. Hope you guys enjoy. We got buffs to some of our tier sets. Assassination got a pretty huge aura buff, and then Killing Spree got some buffs to make it a slightly more rewarding button press. And if you've seen my last video talking about the state of Rogue, you'll know that most of these changes don't really address the core issues among the specs. Now, the release of 11.2 is still a few weeks out at this point. There's still some time for tuning to come, but before honestly commenting on the changes we've gotten, and potentially the future changes down the line, I feel like we need to address the elephant in the room. Class-specific bugs, of which there are a lot. The Rogue Discord has lists for both sub and outlaw specific bugs. Assassination doesn't have one, but I was able to whip up a list with the help of my chat from stream. Alright, but why is this important? I think I can best explain this with an example. At the moment, Subtlety Rogue has a bug where Trickster's Nimble Flurry does not benefit from Shadow Blades. In fact, there are actually several different abilities that don't seem to cleave correctly through Nimble Flurry. But to keep things simple, we'll narrow our focus to this specific interaction, which has existed since the launch of the War Within. Now, to explain it for people less familiar with Rogue, Nimble Flurry is essentially Sub-Rogue's form of cleave. It functions the same as Blade Flurry for Outlaw Rogue, doing the majority of subs damage in Mythic Plus and AoE. Shadow Blades, on the other hand, does a couple things, but what I want to draw attention to is that it causes our attacks to deal 20% additional damage as Shadow while active. So, the existence of this bug makes it so that in our cooldowns, we lose 20% damage on one of our most damaging abilities in AoE. And with Sub Rogue being a very cooldown dependent spec, losing this damage in cooldowns is a pretty big deal. And at the moment, on the 11.2 PTR, and for all the expansions so far, Trickster Sub Rogue, while often the better performing of the two available talent trees for Subtlety, has been a pretty bad Mythic Plus specialization. As such, nobody really plays it. Okay, suppose Blizzard recognizes this. They say, hey, Sub Rogue needs some love. Let's aura buff Sub Rogue so it does more competitive damage for Mythic Plus, and they buff all Sub Rogue's damage by some flat percentage. Well, now all of a sudden Sub Rogue is the best performing spec in Raid, especially in single target, because this Nimble Flurry bug we talked about doesn't matter if there are no ads. So, while this aura buff would bring Sub Rogue's damage to a spot that's more appropriate for Mythic Plus, it would dramatically skew its raid performance relative to the other DPS specs. And, for this reason, this type of scenario is something that will never happen. Blizzard tune classes around their raid performance, and if Sub Rogue is already good in raid, it's unlikely they're going to buff it. One way you can think of this is imagine you have this scale for Mythic Plus and raid. By nature of this bug existing, Sub Rogue is skewed towards worse Mythic Plus performance. So, if Trickster Sub Rogue is tuned to be average in raid, chances are it will perform below average in Mythic Plus. So, as you can see, this bug makes it so that Trickster Sub Rogue will forever be fighting an uphill battle if it wants to contest in the Mythic Plus meta. Because even when favorable tuning comes around, like what we saw at the start of this video, it fails to address the disparity between the two game types. Again, referencing the tuning we got today, I do gotta walk this statement back a little bit. Nimble Flurry and Black Powder buffs directly improve Mythic Plus performance, so W Blizzard. Now, I do want to clarify, this bug, referencing a random rookery log of mine from a few months back, would only account for 2% of my overall damage. So, fixing this on its own won't immediately make Trickster Sub Rogue a meta specialization, but it would absolutely be a step in the right direction. And so, this is why this needs to be talked about. Now, not every bug out there are as impactful as the one we just discussed, but there are enough of them that I think deserve attention, so the next portion of this video will be me showcasing a bunch. And I hope that by sharing this, it falls under the right pair of eyes, and maybe some of these interactions get addressed. So, in no particular order, Darkest Night does not buff Shadow to Eviscerate. Shuriken Storm consumes both of the Rotten stacks. Shadowcraft does not refund combo points right after a stance shift. For instance, shortly after pressing Shadow Dance. Using Adrenaline Rush with it already active and improved Adrenaline Rush talented will not fully refill your energy. Grappling Hook will fire but fail to move the player if the environment is obstructing its path, then go on cooldown. Roll the Bones buffs will sometimes stay behind after re-rolling for no apparent reason. Breaking Vanish with a Trinket will not grant Subterfuge. Casting Adrenaline Rush with a target as Fatebound will flip coins and break stealth. Double Jeopardy will not trigger if you break stealth with Adrenaline Rush. Using Double Jeopardy to go from 6 to 8 stacks of either Fatebound coin will not grant the lucky coin buff. If Darkest Night and Deathstalker's Mark are both up, Deathstalker's Mark cannot be consumed. Except with the 11.2 tier set, in which case using Shiv or Symbols of Death is an exception to this rule. If you vanish with Master Assassin active, it will not refresh. Sometimes when a mob dies with your Deathstalker's Mark, it disappears, and isn't refunded in the form of Darkest Night. If your Darkest Night and Venom gets parried, you retain the combo points from the parry, but consume the buff. If you get parried on a supercharged finisher, you retain the combo points, but lose the supercharger proc. Serrated Bone Spike does not get refunded if the mob they're applied to dies during the travel time of the ability. If you blind the affix Zaltas Bargain, Ascendant, with Airborne Irritant Talented, blind won't apply to nearby mobs. As Assassination Rogue, sometimes you'll proc damage on dead mobs. When you release after dying in a dungeon with bleeds active, you're instantly put back in combat. If you rupture a hostile creature that has its state of hostility changed, then target a new mob, you will deal damage to and pull that mob. And I'll stop here for now. I imagine these issues with Rogue aren't actually unique to Rogue. Other specs likely also have a handful of unintended interactions that they too have to deal with. So, who knows? It seems to me, and I guess my concluding thoughts, are that the classes right now are too complex. There are so many unique interactions between your class's abilities and talent nodes that it seems almost inevitable for certain things to fall through the cracks. So, in my opinion, if addressing all these bugs isn't something Blizzard deems worth putting time into, whenever the next class rework occurs, probably coming up with the next expansion, it should be done with the intent of simplifying things. Reduce the number of interactions that occur and hence the number of potential failed test cases that may fall through. Most likely, I think that would either come from simplifying our talent trees or reducing the number of talent nodes that have chains of interactions through other talents and abilities. There was a good video discussing this exact topic from the perspective of a Mistweaver healer, though I can't seem to find the video now. If you know what I'm referring to, maybe comment below and I'll add the video to this video's description. But that's it. Thanks for watching.